Teacup, Tempest by Wigworm. A knock on his door startled him, and Kakashi rolled off his bed, leaving his bedroom and heading down the hall towards his front door. When he opened the door, he was shocked. "Maki-san? Ito-chan, what are you doing here?" Maki pursed her lips, adjusting the bag over her shoulder, her hair mussed and her face pinched. "You, once offered up your place if I ever needed somewhere to go?" She sounded far more apprehensive than Kakashi had ever heard her before. "Of course." He opened the door wider and let her inside, checking the hall behind her as he closed the door. He was only a little relieved that no one seemed to be paying attention to the beautiful mother knocking on his door. "Thank you." Maki let the child down, who then toddled off to the living room and straightened up with a huff. "I didn't want to intrude, but I only need a place to sleep for one night." "What happened?" Kakashi took the bag from her and showed her where she could put her sandals and hang her light coat. She was wearing a rather endearing shirt that proclaimed her the best mother in the world under her coat, and Kakashi hid his amusement, worried about why she was at his place. They were only just moving from pre-dates to actual dates, and he wasn't entirely sure what was going on. Rolling her eyes, Maki sniffed a little haughtily. "They're fumigating my apartment building, but they never bothered to inform me. So I was packed up and kicked out just half an hour ago. I can't afford a hotel room for a week, but I can for 5 days. So I figured that I can stay with you tonight, get a hotel tomorrow, and then for the last night, Hito can stay at the daycare and I'll do something." She finally shrugged. "Ah." Kakashi smiled then. "You know," he said as he showed her around his small apartment, the kitchen, living room, 2 bedrooms, and bathroom. "You don't have to go to a hotel, Maki. You can crash here all week if you need a place to stay." He didn't really want her doing something on the last night that she didn't have plans for. Whether she was sleeping in a tree or in someone's bed that she conned herself into, he didn't want her to have to do it. "I don't want to intrude," Maki sighed as she settled on his couch with him, watching her son. "I'm sure you weren't expecting 2 totally uninvited guests for one night, never mind a week." "It's not a problem." Kakashi was about to push it until his brain actually kicked into gear, and he remembered that she'd had a bad experience with men, and he didn't want to make her uncomfortable. Hito toddled over to his bookshelf, and Kakashi looked to Maki. "Can he read?" It wasn't as stupid a question as most would think, because he had been able to read when he was 2. "Not yet." Maki smiled softly at the golden boy as he pulled out the brightly colored books. "But if you have the each special editions with pictures and let him open them up, I'll hurt you." Kakashi sighed in relief and sat back a bit more comfortable. He smiled broadly. "I keep those editions in my room," he told Maki with humor, and she chuckled. "Yeah, I was pretty sure you'd have the illustrated copy." She looked at him slyly out of the corner of her eyes. "You seem childish like that." Kakashi couldn't withhold a burst of laughter that didn't even startle Hito as he continued to pull books from the shelves. Maki laughed with him and they settled down. A feeling of contentment bubbled up inside, and Kakashi had to push it aside because he didn't want to act outside of what Maki's expectations of him were. They were at a fragile place in their relationship, and Kakashi wasn't sure where Maki wanted to go with it. "Would you like some tea?" he asked quietly, gesturing to the kitchen. "I have peppermint and senja green." Maki sighed, tired. "Peppermint would be nice. Does it have a lot of caffeine?" "Caffeine-free," Kakashi said over his shoulder as he pulled the old tea kettle from the cupboard and filled it. "I usually have tea before bed, and I certainly don't need something with caffeine after a hard day." He might have to go out and buy a proper tea set if Maki liked to have tea often. It didn't feel right to make Maki drink tea out of his old kettle and a battered coffee cup. "So true," Maki moaned and stretched out on the couch. Kakashi set the water to boil and leaned back against the counter, just watching her. Hito toddled across the floor and pulled himself up onto the couch, crawling over his mother and settling between her and the back of the couch under her arm. Absently, he smiled, his eyes softening. "You seem tired. Did you have a bad day today?" "Oh, nothing too bad, just stuff," she whispered as she waved her hand in the air. "I mean, I have less than a month left, barring problems. I'll be doing regular missions after that." Kakashi couldn't hold back a sigh of relief, and Maki looked over at him curiously, careful not to wake the child sleeping on her. Kakashi just nodded to her. It's good that you'll be able to stop and get to do real missions. He went over what he said and then checked himself. Not that what you're doing right now isn't a real mission, but I mean that you said you wanted to be on the front line. After your long-term mission is over, you should be able to do whatever you want, right? The Anbu U usually only had people spend 2 to 4 years with them because of the high breakdown percentage after 4 years on the job. To know that Maki was almost done her time with Anbu U was good. Excellent, even. It created a feeling in him that he didn't know how to classify. I hope so, Maki nodded. The water began to boil and Kakashi turned back to grab 2 cups and 2 peppermint tea bags. Cream or sweetener? He asked over his shoulder as he dumped a teaspoon of honey into his own mug. Maki murmured a negative to both, so he collected the mugs and made his way back to the living room. She sat up carefully, making sure that Hito didn't wake, and took her a cup, blowing over the top before taking the tiniest sip. She smiled over the rim of the mug, and Kakashi couldn't help but smile back. So, you don't have any family in Konoha? Kakashi opened the conversation, hoping for a little more information about Maki. Since she had to resort to staying at a friend's place, he was assuming that she didn't have any family, but wanted confirmation. No. She sipped out her tea. I'm an orphan. She stopped and bit her lip. At least, I hope I am. Kakashi was confused, and she could obviously see the question in his gray eye. Well, see, I was found after the Kyuubi attack and sent to an orphanage. I wasn't claimed or even looked for that I know of. I'd rather have dead parents than deadbeat ones. She shrugged. Pretty brutal, I know, but she shrugged again. That's just the way I feel. She would have been about 4 during the attack, Kakashi realized. You don't remember anything from before? No, she shook her head. They even gave me a birthday of October 10th because that's when they got me. Kakashi winced. That must be hard, having a birthday then. It certainly isn't a picnic, she snarked. At least Hirohito was born in the summer. When is Hito's birthday? Kakashi leaned back in his chair, watching Maki pet Hito's gold hair gently. The young woman smiled softly at her son. 4 weeks. Almost to the day. 25th of June. He'll be 2. Curiosity, and the fact that Maki was answering his questions, drew Kakashi out to ask another question about something that he thought odd. So, his name? Kakashi smirked. Pretty epic? Maki chuckled under her breath. I like epic. She smirked back and Kakashi rolled his eyes a little. Besides, you only get to name a child once. I thought I'd go all out. What were your other choices? Maki blushed suddenly, and Kakashi perked up. This ought to be good. I had thought about Hiruzen after the Saitame, or Hashirama for the Shodame. Her blush deepened. And I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I had thought about Sakumo as well. Kakashi coughed, startled. It felt like Guy had punched him in the face unexpectedly. Sakumo? Yeah, I told you that I liked learning shinobi history, as long as it's not from textbooks. And I heard your father's story when I was younger, from someone who had known him. I think Hatake Sakumo was a great man. I would have been proud to name my son Sakumo. Still stunned, Kakashi studied Maki and Hito for a bit. Maki fidgeted under his gaze, but didn't look away. Finally, Kakashi nodded. I think he would have liked that. His father had been doing what he thought was right after all, and since Obito's death, Kakashi had a new appreciation for his father's sacrifices. Maki graced him with a thankful smile, glad that he wasn't mad at her, and Kakashi turned his attention to his tea, unsure of how to react in this settling awkwardness. They were silent for a time, and then Hito half woke up, crawling into Maki's lap. Maki cuddled the boy close. It's late, she whispered to Kakashi, though she didn't look away from Hito. I should go to bed. I have work tomorrow. Of course. Kakashi stood and held out a hand. Maki stared at it for a moment before taking it and letting him help her to her feet. I'll get the extra futon out of the closet for Hito-chan. Maki nodded and disappeared into the bathroom with her bag and son to get ready for bed. Kakashi set the futon up beside the guest bed. If either of his beds had been a double, he would have let Maki have that one, since she would have been able to sleep with her son right beside her. But unfortunately, both his bed and his guest bed were singles. Kakashi figured that Maki would rather her son be on the futon to stay closer to the floor so he didn't roll off it and hurt himself. There was a shuffle by the door, and Kakashi looked up from where he was tucking in the ends of the sheet. The sight of Maki standing in the doorway wearing what he guessed to be only a long t-shirt and a pair of panties while holding her son in his PJs practically stopped his brain. He would have reacted if he hadn't had a lot of experience keeping his mind in a tight situation. I changed the sheets and got an extra blanket for both of you. I apologize, but sometimes it gets cold in the apartment at night. Thank you, Maki murmured, watching him like a hawk. He stood and went to the edge of the room. Maki blinked and shook herself before entering the room, carefully leaving lots of space between them as she settled Hito under the covers of the futon and kissing his forehead. She turned to look at him as he walked calmly to the door and stepped outside of the room. Have a good night, Maki-chan, Kakashi said softly before closing the door in his own face and going to his room. He closed his own door and spun, slumping against the door and looking up at the ceiling, biting his lip. Oh, dear gods, what are you doing to me? He muttered before shaking the feeling off and changing into a pair of sweats and going to bed himself. He debated for a moment of sleeping with his mask on, nothing he hadn't done before on missions, before shaking his head and taking the material off his face. He was at home. He didn't need to hide. And if Maki or Hito saw his face in the morning, he was strangely okay with that.